Hello and welcome back to Australian Stories. This story is about the disappearance of Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirste Gordon. It was a cold Saturday afternoon on the 25th of August in 1973, and 11-year-old Joanne Ratcliffe's family were enjoying watching the football at Adelaide Oval in South Australia. Joanne and her family were regulars as they were dedicated Norwood Football Club members. Sitting next to Joanne's parents, Kathleen and Les, was a woman and her granddaughter, 4-year-old Kirste Gordon. The adults knew each other as they were regular supporters of this football team, but the girls had not met before. Despite their age gap, they quickly became friends and enjoyed their afternoon playing together. At about 3:45 p.m. during the third quarter, Kirste told her grandmother that she needed to use the bathroom. Joanne, being such a kind and responsible child, offered to take her to the nearby toilets so the adults wouldn't miss any of the game. The girls never returned. After a while, Joanne's parents, Kathleen and Les, became worried, so her father went to look for the girls. When the girls still hadn't returned by the time the fourth quarter started, the adults were very worried. It should not have taken them this long to go to the nearby toilet block, and Joanne's father had not been able to find them. At the same time, Tony Kilmartin, who was 13 years old at the time, was selling lollies and ice cream at the football ground. During the final quarter, he saw a tall, thin man pick Kirste up and put her under his arm. Joanne was trying to fight him, pulling at the younger girl and screaming the words, "No!" and "Let her go!" Tony thought this was simply two girls who did not want to leave the football game early, so they were tantruming while their father dragged them away. He would later find out how wrong he had been and give the police a description of the man. The man was around 40 years old, tall and thin, with a narrow face, and was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Joanne's mother went to the office and asked them if they could make an announcement over the PA system. Maybe the girls had seen someone that they knew and gotten distracted. But the staff would not make an announcement as they did not want to interrupt the game in the final quarter. The adults looked everywhere, all around the grounds, the tennis court, the basketball court, but they could not find Joanne and Kirste. Now they were extremely worried. The staff finally agreed to announce over the PA that there were 2 lost children, but by then the game was already over, and most people were leaving or had already left. It was then that the assistant curator of Adelaide Oval, Ken Walling, told Joanne's parents that he had seen the girls with a man behind the grandstand, trying to coax a kitten out from under a car. It seems that the man had tried to earn the girls' trust by telling them about a kitten, which I'm sure never existed, and taking them away from the crowd. Joanne's father said that she would not have left the Oval by her own choice. While Joanne's parents were desperately searching for the girls, a witness was driving over the bridge near the Adelaide Zoo and saw Joanne pulling at the same man's arm, kicking him, pushing him and screaming. She was so distressed that the man slowed down and nearly stopped to ask if she was okay. But once again, he thought that it was just 2 girls fighting with their dad about having to leave the zoo. The next day he read a newspaper article and realised that he had seen the abduction taking place. It breaks my heart that people actually saw this kidnapping and they just thought that it was a family matter. I often see parents struggling with their children, but I wonder if I had seen just how upset that Joanne was, an 11-year-old, not a toddler who was having a tantrum, if I would have stopped and asked if she was okay. I'd like to think that I would have. But I guess times were different back then, and you didn't get involved in other people's business. Another witness, Sue Laurie, who was 14 at the time, was visiting the Adelaide Zoo with her father and sister and saw the same tall, thin man with a slender face and a wide-brimmed hat dragging Kirste, while Joanne was trying her best to get him to let her go. Sue later said, "I saw a man coming at a rapid pace towards us on the gravel path, carrying a young child. Following behind, running to keep up with him, was a girl, and she was absolutely punching this man as hard as she could in the back, saying, "Put her down, put her down." And she was so upset. Joanne was only 11 years old, but she had been given the responsibility of looking after 4-year-old Kirste, and she had followed through with her responsibility, even if it meant sacrificing herself. It's because of cases like this that we now teach our children not to talk to strangers, never follow a person who asks you to help with their puppy or kitten, and to yell for help when in danger. Perhaps if this happened today, and Joanne screamed that this was not her father, the many witnesses who had simply assumed that it was a family matter would have intervened. Joanne and Kirste were reported missing that night. From the detailed eyewitness accounts of the abduction, the police were able to produce a detailed composite sketch of the suspect with the distinct wide-brimmed hat. For years afterwards, Joanne's father Les would drive around for hours each night after work, looking for anyone or anything that might help him find his daughter and Kirste. He'd also contact journalists several times a week, asking if they would run a story about the missing girls, just desperate for clues. Years later, Sue Laurie, who had witnessed the abduction take place near the zoo, was watching the news when she saw a story about the 1970 abduction, rape and murders of sisters Judith and Susan McKay, aged 7 and 5, in Townsville, Queensland. When she saw the man that had been arrested for the crime, she instantly recognised the same tall, thin man that she'd seen years ago. His name was Arthur Stanley Brown, a Queensland man who looked exactly like the man who had abducted Joanne and Kirste. Many of Brown's relatives had come forward in the early 1980s, claiming that he had molested them as children. He was never convicted of any of the crimes he was charged with, which included the rape of 6 children, the McKay murders, and 45 sexual assault charges, because he was deemed incompetent with dementia. He died in 2002, legally an innocent man. It makes me absolutely sick that people like this exist in society, as well as the fact that he was charged with so many offences, yet never convicted. I hope he rots in hell. Despite Sue's insistence, Joanne's sister, Susie, does not believe that it was Brown who took her sister. In a case of eerie coincidences, Susie believes that it was a known Adelaide pedophile with almost the same name, Stanley Arthur Hart, and an uncanny resemblance to the suspect who abducted Joanne and Kirste. Hart had been charged with sex offences before, including against an 11-year-old girl, and he was often seen at North Adelaide football games. He had access to a property in Yatina, a remote farming area north of Adelaide, where there were no neighbours close enough to hear anything. Joanne's sister Susie and journalist Brian Littley, who were co-founders of the Missing Persons Awareness Group, Leave a Light On, said there was evidence to suggest that the 2 girls were taken to Yatina and murdered in a shack, and that their bodies were put in barrels and left somewhere at Pekina. This included witnesses who later said that they saw the girls at Hart's home in the days following their disappearance. In fact, Hart's own grandson later came forward, claiming that it was his grandfather who had abducted the girls. In 2009, Mark Trevor Marshall, while in prison, gave a detailed written confession. He claimed he and his grandfather, Stanley Arthur Hart, were both at the Oval that day, and that Hart was responsible for abducting and murdering Joanne and Kirste. According to those who saw the confession, it included specific details that only someone directly involved would know. Unfortunately, Hart had already died in 1999, 10 years before his grandson's confession, taking his secrets to his grave. It blows my mind that there can be this much evidence about a crime, including details that no one else would know, and they cannot name Hart as the killer. There have been many searches for the girls over the years, but no trace of Joanne or Kirste has been found. Despite evidence that seems damning, no one has ever been charged, and both of the main suspects, Brown and Hart, are dead. Although it has been over half a century since Joanne and Kirste went missing, their surviving families still have hope that one day someone will come forward with the evidence that they need to find Joanne and Kirste, and then they will be able to lay them to rest.